For this frame, the longer pieces will create the stiles and the shorter pieces the rails. So I'll lay the longer pieces out for the mortises and the shorter pieces out for the tenons. And for bridle joints, I like the end of the stile to slightly stick past the edge of the rail, then the end of the rail to slightly stick past the edge of the stile. So to lay out my cut lines, I'm just going to put this real thin shim under this piece, and I'll put the rail on there and then butt this stile right up against it like this, and that'll create my score line for the mortises. And we'll do the same for the score lines on the tenons. So I'll set one of my stiles right here. So this is quote-unquote 3/4 inch stock. I did buzz it down with the planer a little bit, and it's actually more like 700 thou. So for the mortises, I think I'm still just going to cut a 1/4 inch wide mortise, and then I'll just cut the tenons accordingly. And I've just roughly penciled in where I'm going to remove material on the mortise piece and the tenon pieces. And now we'll head over to the jig to get things set up. But just before we get to that, I'm going to show you a tip to make setup and calibration a lot easier and quicker. And this trick will allow you to achieve a centered mortise without a lot of test passes and without flipping and reclamping the stock. So just a kerf close to the edge of a scrap piece of stock is all you need. So I'll put the jig back on the saw. I'm also going to show you one quick tip that makes clamping the stock a lot easier. And that trick works like this. Go ahead and set the stock here. And then I'll take 2 carriage stops. Slide one in this lower track. Butt it up tight to your stock. And tighten it down. And then put one in this upper track. Tighten it down. It's just a little bit easier to get your stock nice and aligned before you clamp it. Now I'll go ahead and clamp this test piece in. Now what this piece and the kerf in it allows me to do is slide the stock over, and when this edge lines up with the right side of the kerf here, that'll tell you where 1 0 point is for finding the center of your mortise. So I'll find that, run that over till it lines up right with the edge of that kerf, and now I'll put a carriage stop here on the right side of the stock carriage, and that'll be my 0 point for that side of the workpiece. Now I'll slide it over till the other side lines up with the other side of that kerf. There's good. Now I'll put a carriage stop in on the left side of the jig. Push it up against the jig and tighten it down. Now I have a range-bound limit in which the stock carriage can move, which will help me find the center of the mortise. And now I'll move the stock carriage over until we're engaging this stop, zero the caliper out, and then track the distance that the stock carriage will move over to this stop. That'll give us our distance, then we divide that by 2, and that gives us the exact center of our mortise. So move it over here against this stop, zero the caliper out, right about there. And we'll track our distance over to this stop. And that distance is about 580 thou. So that's what we'll divide by 2. So 580 thou divided by 2 is 290 thou. So we'll move the stock carriage back to 290 thou. Be about right there. And now I'm going to zero the caliper out again, and since my blade kerf is 1/8, move the stock a 1/16 of an inch in either direction, set carriage stops to that, and that'll give me a perfectly centered 1/4 inch wide mortise. All right, so we'll zero that out again, and I'm going to go a 1/16 this direction. Lock this carriage stop, and now I'm going to go 1/16 past 0 in the other direction. There, and then lock this carriage stop. Now ready to cut our test mortise. Now let's pull this piece out and test it and see how centered our mortise is. Grab my other calipers here. So if this mortise is perfectly centered, what's left on either side should be the same thickness. So it looks like here on this first measurement we have about 231 thou. Over here we have about 219 thou. Here about 231 thou. And then about 220 thou. So we're within about 10 thousandths, and I'll call that good enough for this frame. Now we're ready to just production run all of our mortises through. I'm going to start with the blade height a little bit low and crank it up over a few passes on this first piece until I can dial it in right on my score line. And that looks pretty good. I'm pretty much just kissing my score line. So I'll clamp this back in, and now I can run all these through production style. So now that the mortises are cut, I can take this carriage stop here on the right out and loosen the one here on the left. And to cut the tenons, it's going to be the exact same procedure as cutting half laps. I'm just going to remove material in a certain distance, flip the stop, and then remove the same amount of material in the same distance on the other side, and that'll create the tenon. I'm just going to make some test passes so I can slowly dial the thickness of that tenon in until it fits in the mortise. I'll stop right there. Go ahead and move this carriage stop here on the left up to the jig and tighten it down. And I'll flip my stock and then remove the same amount of material on the other face. I'll give this a test fit in the mortise. And we're still pretty tight. I'm going to try taking off about another 10 thou on either side of the tenon. And again, to do that, I'm just going to move the stock carriage over until this carriage stop is tight against the jig. Zero the caliper out, loosen this, move the jig over another 10 thou, and then move the carriage stop in to that new position. Stock carriage over to the stop. Zero the caliper out. Now we know where that position is. Now loosen this and move the stock carriage toward the blade about another 10 thou. Right about there. Tighten this back up. And then we'll cut that tenon again. I'll put our tenon back in and make 2 more passes on it and see what we come up with then. Alright, now we'll give this a test fit. Still just a little tight, so I'm going to go through that process one more time. Alright, I've got the stop moved over by about 10 thou. So let's see what this gets us. Now let's see. And that is pretty good. I think I'm going to take about another 5 thou off either side of that tenon, and then we'll be good to go. Just be a little bit tight for a glue up. All right, try this one more time. And now we'll give this one final test fit. So that feels just about perfect for a glue up. Not too tight, not too loose. Stays together on its own, but doesn't take a tremendous amount of pressure to push it together. And you can see our faces are lining up really well. So now I'll just run the rest of these tenons through production style, and we'll be ready to put our frame together.
So I'm jumping ahead here just a little bit because I forgot to hit record when I was cutting the rest of the tenons.
Alright, so that's the last tenon. Pull this out and see how the frame fits together. Rails, styles. So, let's see here. Fits pretty well. Fits pretty well. And what's going on with this one? There it goes. And looks like everything fit together pretty well. And there you have your bridle jointed frame.